Welcome to Scotland is Now, Race to Zero, a two-day conference brought to you by Team Scotland, a partnership approach led by Scottish Development International and the Scottish Government. We hope that you've been able to join several of our sessions yesterday and earlier today, and look forward to our sessions this afternoon. Full details of the programme and our fantastic speakers can be found on the conference website, www.scotlandracetozero.co.uk. I am Mary Henderson from Scottish Development International, and I'm here to introduce our next session, which is the strength of Scotland's life sciences sector. And I'd now like to hand over to Dr. Glen Crocker, Head of Life Sciences at JLL, who will be chairing the discussion. Glen.
Thank you, Mary, and hello everybody, and welcome to this session. As many of you, I'm sure, are aware, life science is a very important industry for Scotland, and one in which it punches way above its weight. So to discuss the sector and the opportunity it presents, we've got an excellent panel lined up alongside the Minister for Trade, Innovation and Public Finance, who will share the government's perspective on the industry. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists to give their views on particular life science topics. But first, I'll just give a quick overview of the sector from the perspective of how we look at it within JLL when we're advising clients in terms of what the sector looks like locally. And we've done a lot of work on looking at the Scottish life science sector. So here are some of the points that we look at. The way that we come at it is from what the ingredients are for a successful cluster. And there's a whole raft of different areas. So I'm going to look at Scotland through this particular lens, through bearing up against these metrics. So the size and the makeup of the company base, what the finance is like, because that's finance that drives the development of the life science sector. Access to talent is the engine that really is so vitally important for the sector. Intellectual property from the strong universities, startups and spin-outs, very important, alongside the infrastructure to house all the companies and the activity that goes on in the sector. And then finally, the political environment, not just funding, but how supportive the policies are for the companies. So I'm going to move first onto some of these metrics. Underpinning the sector in any location, anywhere in the world, is the academic research base. And you can see that we look at the level of research and the quality of research based on the global rankings in life sciences. And Scotland has 3 universities within the top 100 ranking globally and 2 others just outside the top 100. And to put that into perspective, France has 2 universities in the top 100. Netherlands has none. Germany has 5. So Scotland is pretty much on par with those nations. And this is leading to spin-out activity, and the universities are very good at spinning out opportunities and commercializing that research. And as I mentioned before, talent is also important. So the quality of the university base also leads to a quality talent base, both in the production of graduates and postdoctoral researchers. So all in all, that's a really good foundation for the industry locally. Moving on to the next slide. We also look at startups and the age of the population of companies. So startups is important because although spin-outs from universities are included in this, startups are really important because they are the next generation of companies. So if you are an investor in real estate, for example, you want to know what the environment looks like today and what demand looks like today, but you also want to know what it's looking like in 5 years' time. And the startups of today are the companies that are needing 30, 40,000 square feet in 4 or 5 years' time. So having a healthy startup population, as there is in Scotland, is really important. And the young company population is important as well, because that means that these are generally fast-growing companies that are going to continue to drive demand. Next, on the next slide, we'll look at investment. Investment is really important for companies because That is the driver, particularly with companies developing products and doing research and development. A lot of them may not even have any revenues, and so investment from venture capital or the public markets is very important. So we look at venture capital investment in this instance, and so there's just under £500 million that's been invested in life sciences companies in Scotland over the past 5 years. Compare that with other locations, it's pretty good. It's only about half of what is invested in Cambridge over the same period, but it's still a pretty good outcome. And then on top of that, we're seeing investment from the public equity markets as well, where companies have listed on UK and overseas stock exchanges. And then underpinning that with non-diluted funding is grants from the public sector, from Innovate for UK and from the Scottish Enterprise and Scottish Government, and the European investment as well over the past years. And Scottish companies and Scottish research base has done pretty well in that regard and has garnered a significant proportion of grant funding. So moving on to where the companies are based. You can see from this map, this is a heat map showing the location of all the companies in the life science sector in Scotland. And it's the central belt between Glasgow and Edinburgh, where is the highest concentration. But we also see activity around Dundee, Aberdeen and Inverness as well. You can see the other hotspots across the country. And we also look at what the population of the companies are, so what the type of businesses are. And that's really interesting across the Scottish landscape, because they quite differ quite a lot from location to location. In Aberdeen, there's a lot of pharma and biotech companies. In Edinburgh, and to a lesser extent in Glasgow and Dundee, there's a high proportion of discovery and development services type companies. Whereas in Glasgow and Dundee in particular, medtech is very strong, while you see digital health stands out in Inverness. So all the key bases are actually covered with particular strengths in particular locations, which is really, really interesting. And that specialization is important to just build up the ecosystem and have that strength of talent and attraction to investors. And moving on to the final slide, just going back to the original slide, which showed the markers that we had put down for what makes a successful life science cluster. As you can see, from our perspective, there are ticks in all of these boxes. This has been a pretty speedy rattle through of the sector, but we're very happy to talk further about it. But from our perspective, as I say, life sciences is very well placed in Scotland. So I'm going to now move on to introduce the Minister for Innovation and Trade, Innovation and Public Finance, Ivan McKee, who's going to give us an overview of the government's perspective on the sector.
Good afternoon, Glen. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Super, and thank you very much for that excellent overview that I want to refer back to. It was very helpful, and no problem with getting my job title muddled. I do that myself, and they keep changing it on me, which makes it even harder. But thanks very much. I want to talk about the strength of the life science sector in Scotland and put that in a bit of context and talk about what government's doing to contribute to moving forward those 7 areas that you've mentioned, Glen. Certainly can talk to the political support, and rest assured the Scottish Government is fully behind the sector. But I think we've got something valuable, I believe, to say across all of those other 6 areas you identified. First of all, to talk about the strength of the sector in Scotland, the academic underpinnings, as you identify, is absolutely critical. We recognise that as being hugely important, and results like Scotland 3 France 2, and Scotland 3, Netherlands 0. You don't hear those very often. So we really recognise what we've got there and the requirement to build on that. The fact that we've got that spread throughout the country across several universities, and the fact that we've got clusters built around those, and the fact that those are largely focused on different subsectors within the sector, I think is also hugely important, and something that we recognise that regional strength, if you like, the ability to have strength and depth in specific subsectors within life science is hugely valuable. I want to talk a wee bit about our inward investment plan that we produced in October of last year, and that followed quite a bit of detailed analytical work to identify the sectors where Scotland had strength on a global stage, and then how we would go about attracting businesses to come and be part of those clusters that you've been talking about, because we very much see this as being a combined effort between the base that we have, our universities, and the skills base and the research base we've talked about, the triple helix of the universities working with our NHS and working with our life science industrial sector, but also that combination of indigenous startup and spin-out businesses partnering with global players that come to base themselves in Scotland and building those clusters, because that serves as a talent attractor. It attracts more businesses as well into the cluster and really gives us the punch to be able to operate on the global stage. So the inward investment plan was very much focused on how we go about further improving our strengths there, because Scotland has been the best performing part of the UK outside of London in attracting foreign direct investment for each of the last 7 years. But we recognise there's more to do there to improve the quality of that investment and its impact on those life science clusters we want to continue to grow in Scotland. So the investment plan talks to who we want to target, where we're going to find those investors, what the story that Scotland's got to sell to them is, and how we'll leverage our global networks to be able to deliver that message and get a positive result from those investors seeking to base themselves in Scotland. The plan is being rolled out now over the last few months through government, through our agencies, through Scottish Enterprise, through SDI, but very importantly across the rest of the ecosystem in Scotland, including our universities with their tremendous global reach, our global Scot networks and trade envoys and others. The second thing I want to talk about is our global capital investment plan that we will be launching next week. And that partners alongside our FDI plan. It looks at what we need to do to attract capital investment to support really three aspects within Scotland. First of all, around about that business growth journey, the need for businesses, particularly in the life science sector, start-up, spin-out businesses, to attract significant amounts of capital investment, business investment to power their growth journey in the pre-revenue and the early revenue stages. Government has a role to play there, of course we do, and I think we do that to good effect. But it's very important, of course, that we've got the levers to be able to pull in that capital investment, be that angels where Scotland does well, but very much around about venture capital investment. And we recognise we've got more to do there. But the Global Capital Investment Plan really focuses in on what we have to do to deliver that. The second part of that is around about infrastructure, and the third part around about the commercial real estate. Now, again, as you mentioned in your introductory remarks, both of those are hugely interlinked, because building those clusters, place-based clusters where we have the industrial park, co-located very often with universities, with NHS hospitals and facilities, to put that space in place for businesses to be able to easily grow within a business park, within that cluster environment. And there are many of those across Scotland. As you said, each focused on a different aspect of our subsectoral strengths. Edinburgh BioQuarter is one, and I know we have Anna from Edinburgh BioQuarter on the session later on. But across Glasgow, Dundee, and Aberdeen, and Inverness, we have similarly based clusters, which there's great strength in those. So the strategic approach to looking to investors to attract them into investing in what is a very coordinated approach around about opportunities to invest in the pipeline of growth businesses in Scotland opportunities to invest in the commercial real estate that supports their growth and the infrastructure that goes around about it. That coordinated approach is central to that global capital investment plan, and we think it's something that's going to yield particular dividends as we take that forward to global investors. And I think I just want to finish up by talking about a very important aspect also of this journey for us, which is round about the values that underpin it. So both within the foreign direct investment plan and the capital investment plan, we really stress those values within Scotland. The journey to net zero, which this event is focused on. The just transition as part of that journey, and the desire to build a greener economy as a consequence, but also well-being and the importance that that plays within Scotland's economic strategy. The role that obviously the life science sector plays in that, increasing not just the economic prospects within Scotland, but also the health and well-being prospects are hugely important to that. And that inclusive growth aspect, where we want the benefits of this investment to be spread right across Scotland, and again refers back to the comments on that cluster building and the regional strengths we have right across all parts of the country. So that value-driven approach to attracting investment, tying in very, very strongly with the ESG investment trends that we see globally, is very central to where we're taking this pitch and this message. So I think all of that put together with a reputation for innovation, the strengths we've already demonstrated in our life science sector, the very strong response we had to COVID, where many businesses across Scotland were involved in vaccine development, the vaccine supply chain, test supply chain, and cures and treatments for COVID really talks to that, and the central role that government has had to play through our agencies in supporting those businesses to get to where they are over a number of years. I think all of that working together makes Scotland a very attractive place for that inward investment and that capital investment, and I'm very much looking forward to the discussion as it unfolds over the rest of this session. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you very much, Minister. And if you don't mind, we've got time for a couple of questions from the audience. One is, when and where can we see the capital investment plan?
It's getting released next week, so it will be on the government website, but anybody that's interested in getting the link mailed to them, we can just let us know through the organisers of the session, and we'll get that sent out to you.
Great, thank you. And can you give us an indication of maybe one of the examples of what the government plans to do to instigate more investment into the
Yeah, and I think if the plan's really important because it kind of lays out alongside the FDI plan what our priorities are and how we're going to go and execute on that, and it gets everybody kind of talking to a common language and a common understanding of what those priorities are. So then it's about pulling Team Scotland together, if you like, which is hugely important because what our universities are doing, what government are doing, what agencies are doing, what local authorities are doing, and what businesses are doing, having that coordinated. So when we take those investment messages out to investment forums to talk and have conversations with VCs globally about the strengths of Scotland and other institutional investors, we're able to pitch that in a very coherent way, and the repetitive pitching of that coherent message is hugely important to get cut through for investors to understand what's important to what the advantages are of investing in Scotland and the journey they can hope to experience and benefit from by coming to Scotland.
Great. Okay, thank you. Well, we look forward to seeing the report, and thank you very much for speaking to us today. And I will get your title right, Minister for Trade, Innovation and Public Finance, which I had to quickly scramble to correct from what I had written down incorrectly. But thank you again. And we will now carry on with the rest of the session.
Thank you.
Okay, I'd now like to introduce our panel. They are Dave Tudor, Managing Director of Medicines Manufacturing Innovation Centre and Director of Digital Technologies Group. James Sheppard, who is the head of commercial of UK and Ireland at Kadans Science Partner. Anna Stamp, who's the interim program director at Edinburgh BioQuarter, and Ian Campbell, who's the chief business officer at LifeArc. So if I can just move on to Dave, first of all. Dave, can you tell me what are the current strengths that attract life science companies to Scotland, and how will the new Medicines Manufacturing Innovation Centre continue to drive new businesses to locate here? What contribution do you expect it to make?
So Glen, thank you for the chance to be here this afternoon. Thanks to you and the Minister for a really good summary of the life sciences sector. This is a sector in Scotland that is on the move. It's growing between 6 and 10% per annum. And of course, if you compare that to other life sciences sectors in other countries, then we're right up there in the top quartile. So it's great to see. Now, in answer to your first question, why do I think that's happening? I think it comes down to three really important things for Scotland. First of all is innovation confidence. There is confidence in our ability through the academics, the NHS and the company base that we have, that we can deliver on innovation. Whether that innovation is the creation of an asset or the development of an asset or bringing it to market and translating it, there is confidence in that innovation ecosystem. And you've just shown the facts with some of the university statistics there, which really back that point up. So that's important. When these drug companies or medical device companies are investing their money, they want to make sure it's going to happen on time and they're going to get what they want from the programme. The second point is in around the skills. You know, if this sector delivers its ambition to be between 8 and 10 billion pounds for the Scottish economy, we're going to have to add another 30,000 people into the sector, on top of the 40,000 today that work in it. So it's really important we have got a skills ecosystem. We've got a strong skills investment plan through Skills Development Scotland, and that we're executing on that. We're creating the right graduate capability, and we're creating the right postdoctoral and research capability, as well as the colleges and the schools driving through the apprenticeship programmes that we have. So that's really important. And so far, Scotland have done a really, really strong job in that area over the last 5 years or so. And my last point is collaboration. You've heard that from Mr. McKee already, but this triple helix of the academics, NHS and industry working together to solve deep-rooted, complex, difficult challenges. And you know, the impact that Scotland has had on the COVID-19 challenge has been huge. And we see this all over Scotland just now. We see collaboration at the centre of what we're trying to achieve. Parts of Scotland working together where in the past they didn't work together, and that triple helix mechanism working really effectively. Now, to go on to the second question about the Medicines Manufacturing Innovation Centre, what's that all about? Well, it's important to understand if you take the pharmaceutical sector in Scotland, and this is a really important statistic, right? We generate about 50% of the value from research and development companies. That's companies that are involved in creating a pharmaceutical asset. And then the other 50% comes from companies that are actually producing the drug or producing services to support the drug. So the question is that 50-50 ratio right? Well, in my opinion, it's not right. For the amount of research and development we're doing, our manufacturing base should and could be a lot bigger in Scotland. And that is a huge focus for me and for the industry leadership group for Life Sciences Scotland. The Medicines Manufacturing Innovation Centre is a key part of that strategy. We are looking at building collaborations, driving into advanced, disruptive and modular technology challenges for the industry, getting ahead of the industry, not working what the industry are doing today, but getting ahead of the industry. And you know, the pharmaceutical sector globally has been a bit slow in this area. If you look at how cars have developed, aeroplanes, oil and gas sectors, they have adopted technology faster, better than we have. And so MMIC is a clear strategy to try and drive that programme at a faster pace and with better outcomes, translating advanced technologies into how we make medicines today. It will deliver productivity, it will get rid of waste. And in the topic of today's conference discussion, It will help the net zero agenda, the carbon agenda, because all of these technologies will mean less waste, less input materials and higher productivity, which helps that sustainability question.
Great, thank you, Dave. And just if I can just follow up on one of the points that you made, you talked about skills being one of the key elements in Scotland. And in manufacturing, people with those manufacturing skills are actually quite rare. And is that going to be an element of the Medicines Manufacturing Innovation Centre to develop that skill base further?
Yes, I mean, it's a great question you're asking. If I look at where the gap really is just now for us on skills, it's in around quality professionals, the ability to drive change in the regulatory environment. Scotland has got a job to do there on that skills agenda. And I think MMIC can showcase how you make changes with the regulator. We're working in partnership with MHRA in the UK, and we're in discussions with FDA and the EMEA in Europe, obviously. The second area is in around digital and data analytics. Data is really important. I'm old enough to remember when making the batch of drugs was important. I'm old enough to remember you had to have really good paperwork with that batch of drugs. But what's important now is data, and the ability to have a clear data strategy, to be able to interpret that to get better performance management and solve deep-rooted problems is a real skill set. So data analytics and data science is a real skills focus for MMIC, and I know for the Skills Investment Plan in Scotland.
Okay, great, thank you. And I've got lots more questions to ask you actually, but we'll hold on that and we'll come back to that later because I'd like to introduce our second panelist, which is James Sheppard of Kadans Science Partner. James, I've got a question for you about Kadans and why Kadans is interested in the Scottish market, and what do you think its future potential could be? I know that Kadans has got a base now in the west of Scotland Science Park. So can you expand on that, please?
Hi, Glenn. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me. So, yeah, as you say, we have a base at the West of Scotland Science Park just outside Glasgow, and we have a partnership with the University of Glasgow as well, which we are is in its infancy but growing quite nicely. So, I guess the question that you asked is why are we interested and what's the potential of Scotland? And for me, they're kind of the same question here. We're really interested in the future potential of the Scottish life science market. And it already has a thriving ecosystem, as you know, the Minister, as yourself, as Dave, has all recognised so far on this panel. But that word ecosystem gets used a lot in life sciences, and I thought it would kind of be useful if I break it down about what we as commercial real estate investors, what do we mean by ecosystem and what do we look for? So the first one of those aspects is people. So people is a word, and actually you've seen it already in the panel somewhat. People is a word that often gets misused as the word graduates. Now, Scotland is amazing at producing graduates. You only had to look at the stats you showed up in your initial presentation. But what's the hardest thing to do in life sciences? And this is not unique to Scotland. It is recruit mid to senior executive talent, the people who are going to come into your business, transform it and grow it. And where does most of that reside at the moment? Well, in the UK around the Golden Triangle, or alternatively within big pharma companies. So how do you as an ecosystem begin to tease out those people who are going to grow your businesses? And secondly, how do you then start to articulate what's already there? And who are the people who are growing these businesses in that space? So people is the entire spectrum, from graduates to postdocs to ancillary talent, all the way through to that senior executive piece. So that's the first element, people. The second one is funding. And you mentioned, obviously, Scotland raising almost $500 million over the past 5 years, puts it in an unbelievable position. There's an awful lot more to do there. You know, you've got people like Baillie Gifford, Epiderics Capital, Archangels, all sorts of investors active in that market already. And it's just about how you continue to keep boosting that and attracting, as the Minister was saying, attracting more people to be based in and around Scotland to invest in local companies and ensure they don't leave. The third element is space. So space comes in all different shapes and sizes, but from a commercial real estate perspective, it's around building the right type of space building it at the right quantities, and building it at the right time. So follow-on development is critical. Building one incubator in isolation is not going to be enough to transform the sector. It needs a coordinated countrywide approach with people like myself and others to develop that kind of commercial real estate proposition. Because what you don't want to happen is you build a great incubator, it's incredibly successful, but then the companies have got nowhere to go. So what do? Well, they get on a train or they get on a plane and they either go to the US or they go to Oxford or they go to Cambridge. So it's about a coordinated approach to space and how you deliver space over a timeline that's not just 3 years, but the next 30 years. So you've got a roadmap for where companies are being able to base themselves and can see themselves growing and developing, and building the right type of space, building laboratory capable space, building turnkey laboratories, building GMP manufacturing centers, all critical parts of the ecosystem that the panel have already alluded to. And how do you create all of those different parts? The final piece is around professional services. None of these companies, whether you're a global pharma company or spin out from a university, none of them exist in isolation. They need the support of a whole host of professional services to sit alongside them and create that kind of growth mindset across these businesses. So Kadans is active in Scotland already. We're by no means done yet. We think there is a huge amount of opportunity across the Scottish market, really strong and growing ecosystem where it is at the moment, but still some gaps that I think that we and others on this panel can help to address.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, James. I'm going to come back to you later with some more questions, if I may, but I'd like to move on now to Anna to talk more about the BioQuarter. Anna, could you tell us more about what the ambitions are for BioQuarter? Explain to people who maybe aren't familiar with it what it is and why BioQuarter offers a great location for life science companies.
Yes, well, good afternoon, and thank you for having me on the panel this afternoon, and the opportunity to showcase BioQuarter at this very exciting time. So, as I hope you know, BioQuarter is currently a triple helix science park. We sit about 15 minutes, 3 miles from the city centre. The site was triggered back in 1997 by the very bold decisions of the city forefathers to relocate our city's main teaching hospital from the old Lauriston site out to the Little France area of Edinburgh. If you go to the next slide. And today's BioQuarter, we have over 8,000 staff and students on our site, plus a huge number of daily patient and visitor numbers. The site is a melting pot of activity. It has 2.5 million square foot of specialist facilities and has had investment of over 600 million capital to date. Next slide, please. And the best bit is that we still have 61 acres of land to be developed, which is very exciting and part of our very ambitious long-term plan. The next slide. So a lot of what's been said already is very atypical of BioQuarter. BioQuarter is at a tipping point. We believe with the right investment and expertise, we can unlock BioQuarter's full potential. Our plans are to go to the market in the next 3 months and procure a new private sector partner to form a joint venture strategic partnership to accelerate development of the site and accelerate the growth of commercial innovation. Next slide, please. The ambition of the BioQuarter partners is to transition the site from its current science park into Edinburgh Health Innovation District and become a global destination for pioneering health innovation and enterprise. With our public-private joint venture, we can develop the site into a new neighbourhood of Edinburgh, a mixed-use, welcoming urban quarter where people can live, they can learn, and they can work. We plan to build shops, cafes, hotels, nurseries, residential homes to sit alongside the new state-of-the-art innovation labs and offices and other facilities that we've heard about that's necessity for this type of innovation district. We will invest in the public realm and ensure that the sustainability and well-being is at the heart of all our decisions. Public realm being the glue that keeps the site together, and expectations of sites like BioQuarter are very high with their public realm. So although BioQuarter has seen steady development over the past 17 years, if it continues on its current trajectory without increasing the pace and scale of development and taking the building by building approach, we will begin to lose out to other sites in terms of innovation, investment, and people. Investment in place and creation of innovation hubs like BioQuarter to create a critical mass is a key aspect to any site's success. We must attract and we must grow a critical mass of innovation businesses. Now, more than ever, people and companies have real great expectations of their environment. 20 years ago, to access an innovation economy, you would drive to your suburban science park, you would work in your own building, and then you would drive home. Today, we want urban places which are walkable and they're bikeable, where they can bump into people. We want to build clusters that have real buzz. They want to be car-free. Business want to be near other businesses, research labs and university in dense urban settings and no longer science park settings. So ideas can be turned into new products and collaboration can take place. People want to collaborate, they want to discuss in open, busy spaces with, of course, immediate access to coffee. Innovation hubs allow brands to be identified with quality spaces, with cool locations that all have town centre facilities for their staff to ensure that very valuable work-life balance. Next slide. And final slide. So for BioQuarter, the why now is the question I get asked the most. And the trigger for BioQuarter is the new Usher Institute. It will make its home at the heart of BioQuarter over the next 2 years. It's a new flagship building worth 68 million capital investment. Usher is part of the 1.3 billion Edinburgh and South East Scotland City Region deal, which will establish Edinburgh as the data capital of Europe. And as we've heard already, data is the new oil, and to have Usher sitting at the heart of BioQuarter, we believe really sets us apart.
Great, thank you, Anna. It looks like there's a fantastic opportunity there, which is really starting to come together. And there is already quite a lot of research activity on the site, isn't there? Is that right?
We have a massive research base already through the University of Edinburgh, but also our incubator building as well, with the commercial research that takes place in there. So as I said, the community on site of 8,000, and that includes students as well, which are the next generation of innovators and research, is all on site. And of course, the university hosts the QMRI building, the Chancellor's building, the Scrim building, and the soon to open IRR buildings. Apologies for all the acronyms, and will continue to develop their own estate strategies.
Great, thank you very much, and we'll come back to that later. And if anybody in the audience has any questions for any of the speakers, please do go ahead and pop them into the Q&A box, and we'll try and get to those a bit later. I'd like to move on now to Ian Campbell to talk a bit more about collaboration. Ian, how is collaboration in the life science sector? How important is it? And how do you think it can be strengthened in Scotland? Why is Scotland such a good location for that?
So I think you've heard from all the speakers about the various skills, infrastructure and assets that we have. But fundamentally, to drive the life sciences sector overall, we need to turn great ideas into invention, to turn that invention into innovation, get that innovation adopted, and then reap commercial success. And I think commercial success goes beyond our borders into international elements as well. How do we translate that knowledge into products and services that we can export? However, your presentation, Glen, summed it up quite nicely. We have regional pockets of clusters in different elements. If we can get them to combine and talk together, we can maximize the potential. And really, collaboration is about maximizing the potential. It's having the right people in the right room at the right time. And as we go from ideas to invention to innovation, we need different skill sets. We need different resources. We go from an academic setting of research to generate the idea. By the time it comes out the other end, it has to be in a hospital and it has to be adopted. And through that, we need to go into the manufacturing, the regulatory approvals, etc. So I know James said that we use the word ecosystem a lot, but we need an ecosystem and we need skills across the board to deliver it. And it would be strange for a country of Scotland's size not to be able to maximize it and use different pockets of strengths at different times. And the example I would tend to look at is, what are we going to do from creating an advanced therapy idea, gene therapy on one side, going all the way through to getting adopted in the clinic in the other? And that's going to need the basic science. It's going to need that being translated into a manufacturing process, potentially through the advanced therapy treatment centres, getting that into clinicians' hands and training them how to use it differently before it gets to patients. All of that requires collaboration because we need to protect the IP, we need to create novel regulation, we need to create the SOPs in manufacturing, and no one company will have all of those components. And then if you magnify up and think about Scotland, where's the advantage? We have sufficient critical mass, especially in our NHS, to be a great test bed for clinical trials. Our two main hospitals are about an hour apart by train now. The connectivity is better and we can hit 90% of the population. We are a great test bed to drive innovation into adoption. Dave and I had the privilege of being in a conference last week about innovation in health and life sciences, and we've grown that event from 30 academics at one point up to last week's audience of 300. So we've got a groundswell of interest. We've got the tools that are being developed. Not only have we got MMIC, we've got the innovation centres across different sectors. We've got the idea of taking manufacturing and developing it for a new age world, but we can only do that by translating those new ideas into products and services and retaining the wealth for the economy going forward. The biggest skill we have is our people and our education, but link into that the infrastructure, the hospitals, and the access to patients. Suddenly we've got a vibrant ecosystem that can be delivered. So in the vision with the BioQuarter around it growing, you can see how data and the Data Institute from the Usher is going to play such a vital role as we develop new medicines going forward. So we already have cross-fertilization of different sectors to create new valuable products and services. And as we go forward, that amalgamation of the physical sciences, the life sciences, the biological sciences, and the data sciences is ever more increasing. So we need to galvanize that, and Scotland has strengths in each of those areas. That's why it's a great opportunity for us.
Right, and of course, yeah, in the Edinburgh area, you've got the data and tech strength with likes of Codebase. It was the home for Skyscanner and all of those sort of things. Do you see sort of transition of people that have previously worked in those fields moving into life sciences?
So the use of data, Dave referred to oil and gas about manufacturing, but oil and gas also use data in a far more sophisticated way than we do in life sciences today. The fintech companies use data and AI in completely different ways that could revolutionize not only how we design the products and services, but how we triage patients, how we look at the risk profiles. This cross-fertilization of the digital world and the physical world is becoming ever more prevalent. And if you look at the skills in Scotland, and in particular with the exciting announcement around the Usher being in the BioQuarter, that can only accelerate those developments. It used to be if we had a problem in a lab, we would get a scientist to do things in the test tube and shake a few things around and create an experiment to solve it. Nowadays, we're trying to solve problems before we use the experiment. So going back to the race to zero theme, the fewer test tubes we can use, the more we can maximize from the data, the lower the carbon footprint, but actually the better the patient outcome. And we should all be looking at how does this improve health, wellness as well as prosperity? Because if we get the tools right, not only are we creating an industry that solves medical problems, we're creating a healthy population that can actually maximize the economic benefit. That's what's exciting about combining all these technologies together.
Fantastic, thank you. Picking up on the net zero theme, James, can I come back to you and get your thoughts on what role you think developers of life science real estate can play in that net zero transition, and what's Kadans' views on this?
So I think as commercial developers, we have an absolutely critical role to play in achieving net zero. I think developing commercial laboratory space is hard enough, but that's not an excuse. I think we are looking at all sorts of different modular manufacturing techniques for commercial real estate to reduce our carbon footprint, looking at everything from solar panels and all of the usual things that we can, and how we integrate them into what are highly technical buildings that have high power requirements and are often highly regulated as well. So there is a sort of limit in kind of what you can do. But we're looking at all sorts of different ways. All of our new buildings now have full solar panels on the roofs, for example. Electric vehicle charging is now, it's moved from a nice to have to an absolute must. And I think actually as the commercial real estate sector generally beyond the kind of walls of life sciences is getting better at recognizing this. And we're being driven more and more by tenants saying, you have to do this because of X, Y, Z, which is pushing us to be more creative and ultimately design and deliver buildings which are achieving close to kind of net zero carbon.
Right, thank you. And Anna, when you look at the opportunity at the BioQuarter, how much of a feature is that going to be when you're looking at your appointing development partners and that sort of thing? How much is the net zero aspect going?
It's one of the key factors. A site like BioQuarter has a real responsibility. And our targets for sustainability are very high. We have to take a site-wide approach, though, and sites like BioQuarter need to take a site-wide approach. I don't believe that we can no longer take a building by building, and to take a kind of site like BioQuarter that already has an existing stock of property that wouldn't meet current regulations. What do we do about that? How do we stitch that into our overall plan? How do we transition? How do we have our targets? And how do we deliver them as well? So to answer your question, to sustainability, it goes across everything we're doing. It's no longer a kind of silo. It's there and it needs to be proved. It needs to be at the heart of every decision we make. And it's driven by not just the need for to make targets and to meet regulations. It's actually meeting reputational issues now. There's in the future, a lot of the younger generations, dare I say, they will be selecting who they work for by looking at the sustainability credentials of companies. And I think that's a really important factor. So I think we need to be, we need to be leading. We need to be pioneering sustainability, but it does need to be kind of out there, and we would expect our developer to take the same approach.
Right. Yeah, it feels like there's a great opportunity here with a big canvas to play with. So
absolutely.
We've got a question in from Andrew Fowley. Maybe Dave, I can pass it on to you as somebody who's played a key role in the sector for many years across the board. Andrew's saying, how can we increase deal flow in Scotland to enable the cluster to grow? How can we grow the cluster effectively?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I mean, I think to me, one of the words I would use here is confidence. Okay, so if you analyse, I mean, I think, Glen, you showed the 400 life sciences companies, and if you look at the number of spin-outs, and that number isn't growing. But building the confidence going into the deal making is one aspect I think is very important. Because when I analyse some of the companies in Scotland, we can see that they've cracked some very tough nuts. They're supplying product into the US. And, if you can supply into the US, you can piggyback onto a number of other regions. So I think it's having confidence in that export strategy is an important fact. The second thing is, and I remember having this conversation 4 years ago when I took over the Life Sciences Scotland chair, is that we just didn't have enough entrepreneurial leaders in the country at that time. So there's been a big focus on leadership development, both in the production area and in the creation of assets. And I believe that's changing, right? We're seeing much more confidence in entrepreneurial leadership and having the bravery to go and take a company forward and do the next level of investment, which I think is great for Scotland. And the last thing for me is, and to answer this question, is that we need to be able to tell Scotland's story. I mean, I loved Ian's summary there, but that summary was fantastic. We need the 105 SDI professionals, all of the enterprise agency professionals, all of the global Scots that we have in that network. We need everybody to be able to articulate the story. Because I still experience a situation about is, well, what has Scotland got to offer? We have to answer that question. We have to connect the dots for people and use all of the multimedia, social media capabilities that we have to get that message out there. So leadership, connectivity, and confidence would be my answer to that question.
Great. I'm a big fan of the Saltire Fellows, yes, which I think Scotland does particularly well. And I've used it as an example. So I haven't heard lately. I was hoping that continues to be funded and developed. So I think it's a great initiative.
Yes.
And of course, on top of that, getting everybody to say the same story as well. Do you think that's everybody's singing from the same hymn sheet?
Well, I mean, you're going to get different flavours, okay? I don't mind different flavours of the story, but the core story's got to be right. Okay, so people have to put their own flavour into it, whether you're an academic or you're a healthcare professional or an industrial professional. You've got to be able to tell that story. So I'm okay with that. The one thing I would say, though, that I see this with a positive intent. Okay, 5 years ago, Scotland felt as though it was competing with Scotland in this area. Scotland is a small country of 5 million people. We are a life sciences cluster in the eyes of the world. That's what we are. We shouldn't be thinking about 5 life sciences clusters in Scotland. We should be thinking about Scotland's life sciences cluster, and we should be presenting it that way. Because when Scotland competes with Scotland, Scotland loses. When Scotland collaborates and works together, 9 times out of 10, we win the story. That's a really important point for today.
Fantastic. Thank you. I'm aware that I've probably done an appalling job of chairing this session because we are getting close to the end of our time, and I know we've got a hard stop. So what I would like to do is to just go around the table and ask if everybody has a final sort of sentence to take away for the audience before we finish. And I'll start with you, James. Do you have a call to action?
Yeah, so mine would be just a greater desire from the public sector to collaborate with the private sector. We have a huge amount of knowledge and insight we can bring to the design, development, delivery of campuses, clusters and buildings. So greater collaboration at a public sector level with people like myself and others in the field.
Thank you. Ian, over to you.
So I'll come back to a point I made many times when I led Innovate UK and when I first came up to Scotland in that role, and that was to heighten the ambition. If you need to raise £1 million to take your idea further, ask for £1 million. Don't ask for £100,000 because it's a safe thing to progress you stepwise. We need to build, as Dave says, some confidence into the system, but also if you know what you're chasing, be bold and be ambitious. Don't let yourself be hindered by the prospect of it being difficult to do. If it's difficult to do and you succeed, you'll achieve great things. So be confident and be ambitious.
If I could just come back on that briefly, I mean, I think the funding environment is key to that confidence and ambition as well, isn't it? And so if you are going out and looking to develop a business and you know that amongst your investor population there's the ability to put in 10 million, then you're more likely to build a plan that starts off with 10 million as opposed to one that starts off with a couple of 100,000 if that's what all you think you can raise. So putting all that together feels like a key element to this.
Yeah, and the success is not the spin out, it's the scale up. So we should be looking always at the scaling potential of the businesses, not just the setting them up in the first place.
Yeah, good. Thanks. Dave, over to you.
Thanks, Glenn. I mentioned at the start of my little talk about momentum. This is a sector, this is a country in this sector that's on the move. The momentum is behind this sector. My ask of everyone is that, can you please keep adding to that momentum? Perhaps you're not adding anything to the momentum and you're just in a neutral situation. My final point is that if you're adding a negative impact to that momentum, then can you please stop it and get out the road? Let's drive this forward.
Right. Let's get rid of the blockers and encourage all the doers. Sounds good. Anna, over to you.
I'll do a shameless pitch. We go to the market in the next couple of months for our public-private joint venture. And I hope as many people put their hat in the ring as possible. And I look forward to our procurement exercise.
Okay. And Ivan, would you like to have a final word?
Yeah, thanks very much. It's been a fascinating discussion and some fabulous points coming through. And it's when you listen to it, the sector's in really, really great hands. So I think continuing with that cooperation and connectedness between the different parts of the ecosystem right across Scotland is hugely important. And I think we can go from strength to strength.
Great. Thank you. And thank you, everybody. I mean, we've had some great points made. Dave talked about the role of the Medicines Manufacturing Innovation Centre, but also referred to the 30,000 additional new jobs that are expected to be developed in the sector over the coming years, and the implications that has for skills and the role that the MMIC has in developing some of those skills. With that leads nicely on to what James and Kadans are doing in Scotland, showing their commitment to the country, but also the importance of having the right facilities to house all those people that are going to be developed and within the sector and have jobs. And obviously Edinburgh BioQuarter, as Anna showed, is a huge opportunity for the country, and not just a UK-wide flagship, but a global flagship that can really firmly put Scotland on the map as the leading life science centre in the world. And then finally, Ian talked about the importance of collaboration, and interestingly picked up, most importantly, on that integration of technology and life sciences and the ability to really drive efficiency and across the board to develop towards the net zero, which life sciences sort of holds its hand up and is not very good when it comes to carbon intensity. There's a lot to go out there, and there's no reason why in Scotland we can't be at the forefront of that. So as the clock ticks around to 1 o'clock, I will say thank you very much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day. If I can just actually hand over to Bonnie, who is going to talk about the next sessions.
Great. Thank you, Glenn. Thank you to the panel for a really insightful and confident discussion. To Dave's point, doing a really great job of telling Scotland's story, and thank you, audience, for joining us. Audience, we look forward to seeing you again for one of the other sessions taking place today as part of the Scotland is Now Race to Zero 2-day conference. The programme for today's sessions is now on your screen, and the link to join the next panel is in the Zoom chat. All your other links for today's events are included in your interactive programme. We look forward to seeing you again shortly. Thank you all for joining.